Tor is one of the best tools for remaining anonymous online, but it's not a magic bullet for online privacy or anonymity in any way. Several people have already been unmasked on the Tor network and even arrested in cases where they were using the Tor network to hide illegal activity. So today we're going to take a look at some of those cases in this video. Now, it's worth mentioning before we start that most of these people, actually none of these people, got caught because of some vulnerability in the Tor network or Tor client. Everyone today had bad Opsec, just doing things in the clearnet from their real IP addresses that could then be connected to their Tor activity, or in some cases, even doing dumb things in real life that could again be linked to their Tor activity. The last example did involve some hacking of a hidden service that somebody was running on the Tor network, but again, this was a flaw in the design of the hidden service and not the Tor network or Tor client itself. So the first two cases that we're going to look at, they both center around bomb threats to a school. There was a student at a high school in Florida who was using Tor to access a dark web marketplace where he could purchase a bomb threat. Basically, it was a service where somebody else would call your school and just make threats to get it locked down. People would use this to try and get out of exams and stuff like that so that they could either get out of going to school that day or just get out of school early. And obviously, if it's a random person somewhere in the world making the threat, then it would be pretty difficult for authorities to track that person down. Well, this kid messed up because he decided to brag about what he had done to some of his friends. So by the third time that he ordered a bomb threat, there's 3 times that he did this, the rumors were already going around, and the police were able to pretty quickly figure out who this kid was by just talking to people at the school. So they issued a search warrant for the kid's phone, and they found evidence that he had been on the dark web. Now, I couldn't find out exactly what evidence it was that the police found. The article did mention that this kid had a jailbroken phone and that he was dual booting another OS on it. I'm not exactly sure what that has to do with anything because I don't think that you need to run a jailbroken iPhone in order to access Tor. I'm pretty sure there's an app for that. Especially you don't need to run a second OS. So maybe they found a Tor session that was open on the phone, or maybe there was a text file that was containing deep web links. But anyway, the kid did inevitably end up confessing that he had ordered the bomb threats when police arrested him. So maybe it was just an intimidation tactic that really won the case for the police, because the only hard evidence that's really mentioned here is that he bragged to people, which I guess created witnesses in a way. So to take away from this story is obviously don't brag about your illegal activities on the dark web or anywhere else really. And it's also probably a good idea to not leave evidence behind of you being on the dark web. And of course, don't confess anything, especially if the cops don't actually have hard evidence on you. So the next bomb threat came from a Harvard student, Eldo Kim, and it's the same idea. He made a bomb threat to get out of some exams, but this time he handled it himself by emailing the threats over Tor using Guerrilla Mail. So there is a little bit of defense in depth here. The guy was smart enough to use Guerrilla Mail instead of signing into his Gmail from Tor. And Guerrilla Mail, for those of you that don't know, is just a temporary email service. It doesn't ask you for any information, and obviously it works over Tor. So it's a good way for, I guess, sending anonymous emails. But where he messed up is he logged into the computer that he was using with his school account. I'm guessing that he probably signed on to the school network. I don't think he was necessarily using a school in a computer in the school's library. But of course, if his account is administered through the school, or the network is obviously administered through the school, they can keep track of stuff that you're doing, like what applications are communicating over the network. And at that time this bomb threat was made, he was the only one on the school that was using Tor. So Yeah, this was enough evidence to get him arrested, and he admitted to making the threats when questioned by police. So, again, don't admit to anything. He might have had some plausible deniability in this case. Like, if the schools only knew that he was connected to the Tor network and nothing else, like if they didn't know that he was on Gorilla Mail, like if they didn't actually have screenshots of the computer or screen recordings or anything like that, he could have argued that the bomb threat came from somewhere else in the world, and it could literally be anywhere in the world because it's over the Tor network, and just say that it was a coincidence he was on there at the same time. And even this was enough to get him arrested. You know, he admitted to making the threats. So if he just didn't crack and confess, he may have gotten away with it. Also, if he had used a bridge to access the school network over Tor, then he wouldn't have gotten questioned by police in the first place because the school's network wouldn't actually know that he's connecting to the Tor network. Next is Hector Monsegur, aka Sabu, a pretty well-known hacker and the founder of Lulsec. So he was already being monitored online for his involvement with Lulsec, which he claimed or had claimed responsibility for several different online attacks and hacking attacks. Sabu's mistake was connecting to an IRC that he was using for organizing and executing hacking attacks without using Tor. So since the FBI was monitoring this IRC already, they were basically collecting every IP address that had connected to it. And normally he would go on here using Tor. It's not like he wasn't using Tor the entire time, but one time he signed in and forgot to enable Tor. So now they have this correlation between this guy that they had no idea who it was before because they were on Tor, and now they have a real IP address. Because you see, all Tor exit nodes are public, so it's pretty easy to figure out if the IP that's connecting is actually using Tor or not. And so when that non-Tor IP connected to this IRC to communicate with hackers, it got the feds interested. So the feds figured out what ISP supplied that public IP address, and they were able to get Sabu's address this way and arrest him. And the feds gave him a deal that he could avoid getting decades of jail time in exchange for helping the feds catch other Lulsec members, which Monsegur obliged by. So correlation attacks, they are a thing, and they can be used to de-anonymize you. So it's important to make sure that your Tor activity stays on Tor and you don't mistakenly do something that will connect your Tor activity with your real IP address. Especially if you're doing something illegal, it might just be a good idea to have a dedicated machine that doesn't even connect to anywhere outside of Tor. You know, it's not a good idea to be on the ClearNet and Tor at the same time because it's likely that you will make a mistake. There's nothing inherently wrong with running those two things at the same time, but you might do some ClearNet activity on Tor, you might try to do some Tor activity on the ClearNet, and then those two activities are now correlated with one another. So the last case that we're going to take a look at is probably the most famous case of a Tor user getting caught. Rolf Ulbricht, aka Dread Pirate Roberts, was the founder of the Silk Road. Now, there were a lot of mistakes that Dread Pirate Roberts made with his Opsec, and most of them seem to boil down to greed, or him wanting the Silk Road to just become more famous, because he advertised his site both directly and indirectly on several other ClearNet sites. He even hinted to it in his LinkedIn profile in the early days of the Silk Road, with a quote that I am creating an economic simulation to give people a first-hand experience of what it would be like to live in a world without the systematic use of force. So it's a pretty easy to read between the lines, you know, and see that obviously he's trying to set up some kind of a system or platform for trade to go on without any government regulation, which is pretty much what the Silk Road was. It was an anonymous trade platform that couldn't be regulated by governments. And of course, that's why over 70% of the goods sold on the Silk Road were drugs. This is where the advertising came into play. So there's a number of ClearNet sites that discuss drugs. And Dread Pirate Roberts, he made an account on one of these sites called Shroomery, where he pretty much advertised the Silk Road. In fact, his post under the same name Altoid was one of the earliest mentions of the Silk Road on the internet. So the feds, they they started investigating the Silk Road. They found this post, again, one of the earliest mentions of it on the entire regular internet. And he made a similar post in the same year on the site Bitcoin Talk, where he was soliciting for an IT pro from the Bitcoin community to be the lead developer in a so-called venture-backed Bitcoin startup company. And to make things worse, he used this same username, Altoid, on both of these sites. So it's pretty obvious that this username isn't just the same person, but it's somebody who is obviously trying to promote and expand the Silk Road site by soliciting for help on a Bitcoin forum. So it's probably the owner or a high-level employee of the Silk Road. And he even mentioned the Silk Road when he was questioned by US Customs in San Francisco when they found that Ulbricht had ordered a bunch of fake IDs for himself. So his excuse for, I guess, trying to get out of trouble here was to tell the customs agent that, anybody can just order fake IDs from the Silk Road, and maybe it's some kind of a prank that someone was pulling on him. So this customs agent, they hadn't even heard of the Silk Road at this time. Again, this wasn't a super big thing back around 2011 when all of this was going down. It wasn't well known like it is today. But the agent made sure to document Ulbricht's mention of the Silk Road in their reports, which obviously came into play later when he got caught. And to make things even worse, he set up these accounts so that the replies would be sent to his personal Gmail. He even listed his Gmail address in the post to Bitcoin Talk, where he was trying to get some help with his so-called Bitcoin-backed venture. And he also had similar signatures in his Gmail and his Dread Pirate Robert accounts that he used on the Silk Road. So again, there's lots of correlation. Like you can tell that this is the same guy in all these other places. He even created a Stack Overflow account over Tor, at first with his real name, like his actual government name, which he later changed to Frosty to ask some technical questions, many of which were related to problems that he might have been having with the Silk Road that he was working on at the time. Like a lot of the questions have to do with how to get a site to do certain things in PHP, which is what was used in the back end of the Silk Road site, and how to connect a site to Tor, just lots of things that would obviously tell you this is somebody who's running a hidden service on the deep web. So the feds started watching him in real life, although from a bit of a distance, because they didn't want to go and just raid him or spook him right away, because they were worried that he might have all of his data encrypted and that he would lock his computer before they could actually get to it. So they actually ended up setting up a sting operation at a library where almost every visitor that was there that day was an undercover agent beside Ross Ulbricht himself. And they managed to get him to go away from his computer. I think that they were pretending to have a domestic dispute or something like that. And so Ulbricht went over to try and break it up, to try and be the hero. And, they grabbed his arm, they seized his computer, copied everything off of it, and that was it. So he was found guilty of multiple nonviolent crimes, including money laundering, narcotics trafficking, and running a criminal enterprise. And all of this got him 2 life sentences plus 40 years with no possibility of parole. So there's a lot of problems here. Don't reuse accounts on Tor and the ClearNet. Use a password manager or some other solution for having different usernames and passwords. And also don't go around promoting your illegal enterprises yourself. This really wasn't even a necessary thing, in my opinion, because the Silk Road was by far one of the most active sites on the deep web, and it had revenue that today would have been worth billions of dollars in Bitcoin. I mean, this guy was basically like a modern day Pablo Escobar, just on the internet instead of really dealing in real life and doing a whole lot of gangster stuff in real life. So again, Tor, it's not a magic bullet for privacy. You still need to conduct good Opsec to avoid detection.